friends. This is Brett coming to you with our first episode of the Seeking Our Spirit podcast, the SOS podcast. Really excited to finally be here with you. Have a great guest today. He is my former boss, my friend, my mentor, the Reverend Dr. Howard J. Hess. He's got a great story, and so I look forward to you being able to hear that. If you want to be on the show, contact us at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. Enjoy.
All right, cool. So we're rolling.
Okay.
We're here. Like I was saying before we got started, I'm excited but nervous to finally be doing this. I think we've been talking about doing this for like
3 months, maybe.
Oh man, like a year.
A year,
at least,
yeah.
like a long time. Don't you think?
There you go. Yeah. So we're like good grapes. We kind of age over.
Yeah. So I'm excited to do this because it's been sort of a dream, I guess, but also, just a passion project idea I've had for a long time. And you were the first person I thought of. I was like, if I'm going to do this, the first person has to be you. So,
thank you
the
for that.
The circumstances of life just sort of dictated that it took a lot longer than we had wanted to do this first one.
Yes.
So anyway, so I'm excited to have you, friend, mentor, someone that I have a lot of fun with, but respect and love, and so I want to be the first
great.
one. Yeah,
great intro.
And I guess just to jump off and summarize, this idea for me was it comes out of a desire that I have to talk about spirit or spirituality with people.
Right.
And particularly folks that I probably wouldn't have the opportunity to talk to about that topic, sort of outside of church or in other contexts, which obviously doesn't apply to us. But so the thinking on my part is in the religious world or in the secular world, people use these terms of spirituality or spirit all the time.
Yes, and they mean many different things by it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it's the most important conversation or topic in our lives.
Yes.
And yet, depending on who you interact with and encounter, they're going to have a very different way of speaking about those words.
Yes.
Spirit and spirituality.
Yes.
So that's sort of where this all came from. I just want to sit down with people and get at, what do you mean when you say spirit or spirituality? And I think we don't have to go in these angles, but I just sort of,
That's a good angle.
Well, and maybe you have a better angle. I don't know, but my thinking is, as a way to get into that conversation, maybe talk about what your spiritual timeline is, maybe how you would talk about that.
Yeah.
And or what are the most quote unquote spiritual experience of your life.
Okay, good deal.
So, yeah.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you think?
I think we should get rolling.
All right.
Yeah, so I hear in your question this whole idea of where do we go with spirituality? What does it mean? It means many different things to people. And as a kid growing up in a kind of evangelical world, it had very specific meanings, which later for me turned kind of negative and caused me for a period of time to drop the whole idea of being a Christian. We can get more on that later.
Yeah.
But because it was a spirit that judges you, all right, and not a spirit that enables you or somehow helps you become in fullness who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say when I look back, and I've had to do spiritual autobiographies during my discernment period and so forth, it's very clear there are absolutely distinct spiritual phases in my life, but that if you look at the trend line, what you're going to find is that redemption and resurrection is the core theme of it all for me.
Okay. Redemption and resurrection. So almost like different, like would you go as far as saying like almost different lives?
I would.
campus.
I would. Okay. Yes, I would.
Okay. So yeah, so tell me about that. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Well, we have to go back a little bit and pick up the historical thread. But when I was a kid, my family was extremely kind of weighted down by grief. I think you know this story. I had an older sister that died the year before I was born from a surprise attack of appendicitis, which they did not intervene quickly enough with, and consequently she died when they took her into the hospital.
As a baby?
No, she was 5.
Okay.
And she became, quote unquote, an angel in the eyes of my parents. So there was always the angel there, kind of watching over us, and I was being compared to the angel.
It's a heavy thing.
It is. It was very heavy. It was very heavy.
Now, was she the eldest?
Yes. Yes.
So you were the second child that became the eldest.
You've got it right there.
With the angel looking over you always.
And a lot of dynamics in that whole interaction.
Yeah.
So, and that was at the doctor's direction. They had said to my parents, the best way you're going to get over these feelings of grief is to just have another child and kind of forget about the first one, which we know is terrible advice, but it's advice that people gave at that time, and they didn't get over the first one. Sure. And it was even worsened by the fact that within seconds after I was delivered, I turned blue. And they thought I was going to not make it through the delivery. Wow. And it was early indications of a kind of asthmatic problem, which has persisted throughout my life. So not only do we have the grief that's already there, but we have a kind of overprotection theme that develops because I'm a kid that they're worried about.
Yeah, right off the bat.
Right off the bat, yes.
Wow.
So you can see that beginning to take shape. And in the whole process of growing up, there was just one picture of my older sister, which was hidden away in a cabinet. And we were instructed never to look at that picture and never take it out and never discuss it. I had a younger sister 3 years later. We would sneak into that and look at it. And if my mother saw us doing that, she would burst into tears, which she did a lot. She did a lot. And she would go up to her bedroom and close the door, and she would just say things like, I wish I could die. So there was this overhang of grief that was present throughout my growing up, plus an overhang of asthma, which made it very difficult for me to do physical things.
Right.
So consequently, I'm the proverbial kid that when they're picking teams during recess, there are 2 of us left at the end. One is a crippled kid, and one is me.
Yeah.
And it's a question who they're going to pick to be on their team. In other words, I just really didn't learn a lot of that stuff from early on, which then what I did develop was an ability to kind of, in some ways, rely on that illness as a way of getting out of tough situations. Now, in that process, we were going, because it was at the end of our street, not because of my parents' conviction, we were going to a church which was called a Bible Presbyterian Church, which you've probably never heard of. No. But if you were from the Philadelphia area, you would have heard of it. It was a very evangelical Presbyterian church. It had split away from the main Presbyterian church. And it was evangelical in every aspect. I learned all the different acronyms for Calvinism and was taught that predestination was correct and that if you didn't...
Heady theology.
Heavy, and also with this judgmental theme. So that if you didn't believe in particular ways and have a particular salvation experience, then you weren't going to get to heaven.
Yeah.
And that was emphasized.
Heavy, though, like intellectual sort of theology.
Yes, but not heavy with bright people, if I can say that. Heavy in a, let me think. It was heavy in terms of its multiple layers, but it was not a thoughtful theology, if that makes sense to you. So I go and am adopted, really, after my father's death, I was 13. He died of a heart attack. So here we have some more grief piling on. And this church essentially adopted me. They made me one of their own. They looked after me. And for that reason, and I was very grateful for that. It probably saved me from a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, now fast forward, I go to a place called Wheaton College, which you may have heard of. It's in Illinois, and it is a very good school, but also very evangelical in its basic roots. And in my class was Billy Graham's daughter. Primary largest group of students were Southern Baptists. And there I'd lost the protection of the church, and I was in the larger evangelical culture. Mm-hmm. And thus begins phase 2. Now, phase 2 was affected by the fact that Wheaton is only a train ride away from Chicago. And I was a pretty protected kid.
Up to that point.
Yes. Yeah. Heading for the ministry in an evangelical situation.
You felt called to ministry then?
I did. Yeah, I worked at the church during summers. I preached. My first sermon was on angels. Every single one of my relatives came. Billy Graham had recently published a book about angels, which I referred to in the sermon. Neighbors came.
That's interesting with the tie-in with the sister angel.
Yeah, that's right. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
That's a good thought.
I'm still back there.
You're back there.
Yeah, how did this idea that you have the oldest sibling around and looking over you as this angel, like how that had to impact your sense of spirituality's got to be something
it did.
Hard to talk about. But.
It did, yeah. No, I'm glad to talk about it. And it affected me in a number of ways. And it was interesting. I'll fast forward to when I was in seminary and went to a CPE interview at a hospital in Connecticut. It's really good.
What CPE?
CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. Mm-hmm. It's part of getting
thrown into being a chaplain, basically.
That's right.
The summer.
Yeah. And it was required as a part of the Master's in Divinity. So I'm interviewed by them, and they said, "Have you ever made friends with your sister who died?" Which was the first time, even though I was probably then in my 40s, the first time I'd ever thought about the fact that I could have, and did have already, a relationship with this sister that I needed to come to terms with.
Yeah.
Okay? So that tells you a little bit of what it was like. She was hovering in the background, but I wasn't very clear about it.
Yeah, sounds like you were given parameters for what that relationship could be like through your parents' directives.
That's right.
But you never engaged that relationship on your own level.
We couldn't talk about it. We couldn't have any interaction at all about what it was like for them to lose her. Mm-hmm. So it was a dead-end street.
Right.
The other aspect of it was that they didn't cut my hair until 3.5 or 4 years old. I had this long, blonde, curly hair, which was nice, I guess, but it also caused people to think I was a little girl. So they would say, "Oh, you had the most beautiful little girl." And they would say, "No, that's a little boy." But I think in some ways they were trying to replicate their experience with my sister.
Yeah.
And that was another dominant impact.
Yeah.
So what do you want to ask about that? Anything else?
I don't think so. I just, like I said, I'm just naming. Again, I didn't expect that would even be easy to articulate, but that makes total sense that, in my own words, that, it's like your parents spoke about this sibling and you were told you have this angel that's around.
Yes.
That almost felt to me like it was a potentially, not punitive, but like Santa Claus, like watch out, or the God that's watching over you, looking out, like watch out, your sister's.
She's up there.
Yeah. Watching.
Yeah.
But you couldn't go any further than that. Until
I could
you got
not.
to seminary when someone said, "Hey."
And that's a long time later.
Yeah.
Right. There was another piece of it that was fascinating, and that was that they, in their deification of her, and I think during that period of time, people did often think that young children that died became angels. It was not just their view. Sure. They developed this notion that she was brilliant and that she they told them, I don't know if this is true, but when they went to register her for kindergarten, that she was smart enough to teach the class. Seems very unreasonable,
Yeah, right.
unlikely.
Right.
So therefore, that was transformed onto me. And my father particularly developed this notion that I was an extraordinarily brilliant kid, which
You're a pretty smart guy.
yeah, but I'm not up there in that group that joins a special club.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Yeah.
In fact, in my testing for psychological testing for the priesthood, the psychologist said, "You're really fortunate because your IQ is high, but it's not so high that you won't be able to relate to your practitioners," which is really kind of a weird compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, that's a whole other subject, but that's pretty
Yeah.
pretty insightful of that person, though, because I feel like in the church we probably have a lot of that problem.
We do, yes. People who are somewhere else
Yeah.
in the stratosphere. Yeah, so this notion of being brilliant was not borne out by actuality. If I'm going into too much detail, just pull the cord. My father wanted me to go to a Quaker school in Atlantic City. They have a lot of Quaker schools back in the Philadelphia area, and they're very good academically. And I went up for testing. They had a scholarship that they were offering. And I didn't get the scholarship. And that didn't compute for my father or for me with having this extraordinarily brilliant kid like his angel sister. So there was always a tension around that and a belief that I developed that somehow I was going to disappoint people intellectually.
Okay.
Which is funny. Those kind of things stick with you, even though you have therapy and spiritual direction and you come to see them for what they really are. They still have a little voice that goes with you.
And it that sounds to me like one of these things that we all have in our own ways, where it's the thing that weighs you down.
Yes.
But it also is the thing that drives you.
Yes. Yes. So it's an odd combination of forces when you think about it. And whenever my father would introduce me to anybody, they would say, "Oh, you're this really extraordinarily brilliant kid that your father talks about all the time." And I would think, no, I'm not. Yeah. I'm not that extremely brilliant kid. So there are ways that manifested itself through the years, and that was part of the growing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think, I mean, what I'm sort of hearing in this, I could be totally off, but do you think in terms of your relationship with this thing we call spirit and spirituality, God, do you think that that relationship, for lack of a better term, that you had with this angel sister, right? Whoever your parents told you had to have that, your awareness of this person, and then also those parental expectations that were being projected onto you, did you think those things then bled over to your idea of or understanding of what spirit was?
Yeah.
Do you think your experience of spirituality was this entity that had these high expectations of you, was watching you?
Yes. Well, and also in an evangelical setting, the Spirit does that. You know, the Spirit convicts you, particularly in Calvinistic theology. The Spirit convicts you of your error, of your sin. Okay. And I was taught that when you thought about doing something wrong and then did it, you were committing two sins. One was the sin of thinking about it, of having it occur to you, and the other was the sin of actually doing it. And you would be piling on all these sins, so you need to be really, really careful. Wow. Yeah. But I clamped onto that stuff because this was my support community.
Right.
And I think
reinforcing.
That a lot of people come out of that life experience where these churches were their extended families.
Yeah.
And then they get to the point where they begin to feel like the judging is hurtful to them, and they drop out of any kind of religious organization, although they would claim that they're still very spiritual.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Reject all that. Yeah, and you and I have had many conversations about that. Just the most common spiritual issue you see in people is dealing with that baggage.
Yes. Yeah, and I still see it all the time. I see it all the time.
So, okay, so you've got this in your timeline. So
Right.
you've got this again, I'll just use that term, this spiritually heavy kind of, idea of what God is, of what spirituality is.
Right.
The convicting, the pushing you to be better,
Right.
the judging if you make a mistake. So, where does that sort of go? You sort of talked a little bit about Chicago. Like, does that configure into your journey? In that, I know you well enough to know that I think that was probably as you alluded to, you were so sheltered and protected.
Right.
That was a life of its own.
Yes.
Where you probably really bucked the system and went free. And
yeah, I did. And
it would be interesting to hear then, if you do buck the system and go free, internally, spiritually, how you reconcile those.
Well, this is a fascinating kind of experience. And again, I think a lot of people have this. When you buck the system, in my experience, in an evangelical culture, and I think there are a lot of positive things about the evangelical world, so I don't want to come off sounding like I'm judgmental of that entirely. But when you buck the system, there is a very clear outcome, and that is that you tend to get ejected outside the boundaries of the community. All right, the community is very embracing if you are going along with the system and the rules thereof, but if you stray out of that, then the community has to find a way to deal with you, either to bring you back or to send you away. So keep that in mind as I discover that there is a Chicago.
Yeah.
All right.
What a good town.
Yes. So I'm at Wheaton, and I'm really feeling kind of lost in many respects. I don't think I understood why, but I was. And I would say in my sophomore year, I discovered there was this whole world out there of excitement and forbidden things, which I found that I was drawn towards. And so I would hitchhike into Chicago and stay there overnight. And I had a roommate, a really cool guy, who when they tried to figure out if I was in my bed, because our house parents were missionaries, and they would come and do bed checks, because the word started to get out that I was coming back at 5:30 or 6 in the morning.
Not a typical college experience in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he would put pillows under my covers, and he would say, he's asleep.
Yeah.
Let's be quiet because we don't want to wake him up. He's had a hard day. And that worked very well until he dropped out of school, and he and I both were dating African-American women, which at that period of time was quite unusual. Yeah. And he eventually married that woman, and they've stayed together their whole lives. And I went on to marry somebody else, but we had a really good time.
What time period?
So we're talking, because eventually they caught on at Wheaton that I was away so much. And they had all sorts of rules about what time girls had to be back into the dorm, but none about what time boys had to be there. So they were a little bewildered by how to deal with this. And so what they did is catch me on the fact that I had more chapel absences and lateness than was acceptable. You had to go to chapel every day. And so they gave me the alternative in my senior year of either leaving, withdrawing, I'd get a partial tuition refund, or they were going to kick me out. Now, I saw that coming, so that I knew I was pushing the limits for a couple of years, and I don't blame them for being who they were. They were very clear with me. They gave me a lot of chances along the way.
Yeah.
So I leave Wheaton College before graduation.
And can I clarify? So
Yeah.
The young lady you were dating, was she from Chicago or was she from?
She was very much from Chicago.
Okay, right.
Yeah, she was from a holiness family in Chicago. She used to sing in her church.
Got it. Okay.
Really very attractive woman, although Peg, if you're listening to this, Peg is my wife, you're much more attractive than she was.
Lady Peg.
Yeah, but we dated for a period of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The three of us.
I just wasn't sure of the dynamics. If it was like city girlfriend versus if she was at Wheaton too.
She would never have been at Wheaton, nor would my roommate Mickey's wife been at Wheaton. They were from other worlds.
Yeah.
So
this is what, 60s?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is not insignificant.
Yeah.
Because in Chicago, you've got all of this stuff going on relative to protests and relative to, in '68, the Democratic National Convention. So I go to Chicago. I go and live in Chicago and get a job in the war on poverty. And at this point, I'm done with Christianity. I'm really, truly done with it.
Yeah.
Because Christianity to me was signified by what Wheaton College was like, and that judgmental experience.
Okay. And so, let me ask,
did
that also mean you were done with spirituality? Was there anything quote unquote spiritual in your life at that time?
Well, I think I equated spirituality with evangelical Christianity,
right?
In my own thinking.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think I was clear enough or far enough along to differentiate between the two until much later. All right, so for me, it was the whole deal.
Yeah.
I was dumping the whole deal.
Yeah.
But there's a poem, I forget the author's name, called "The Hound of Heaven," which is about how you can give up on God, or you can attempt to give up on God, but God does not go along with you. Okay. He continues to pursue you out of his love for you, and that is exactly what my experience during the Chicago phase was. Sunday morning would come, I would say, I'm not going anywhere to church, which I'd been in church 5 times a week up to that point. Yeah. And this voice would say, you're not going to be happy if you don't go to church. Now, in retrospect, that was the Spirit hanging on to me by a thread. So I joined the Fourth Presbyterian Church in downtown Chicago, which is a beautiful, incredible church along Michigan Avenue, and went to that church and really was fed by that. So it never worked, is my point. I never could reject the package.
Okay, now say that line again, that you heard this voice saying.
I heard this voice saying, you're not going to be happy if you don't go and worship.
Okay, so it wasn't a guilt thing.
No.
Which I think is significant. Because if you were to say, if it were more tinged with guilt, I think one could easily say that that's just the voice of your parents and the angel
echoing
and all that, still coming through.
Yeah.
No. So I think that's really significant, that your experience of whatever that voice was not a judging.
No, it wasn't a judging. It was actually a very kind, loving voice, which is part of what was hard to resist. And, you know, it was a beautiful church, and the people who went there were quite interesting, and so I was drawn to it. Now, part of the history here, I'll go back just a second, is that my father, because of the Depression, had to drop out of law school. He was a very bright man, but never was able to do professional work. Consequently, I was to fulfill his dream of being a lawyer or something like that. And he was very drawn to classes that were higher classes than we were in. So I went to the Fourth Presbyterian Church, and it was quite classy, and so that is part of what kept me going. But it was also interesting because I'm in a membership. I'll give you an example. I was in a membership class. There was this older woman who would ask me to take her home to her high-rise, and told me about how she had affairs with the Monkees, the singing group, the Monkees.
Oh, okay, singing group, the Monkees.
All right, not monkeys that.
This just took a turn. Okay. Yes.
All right. Yes,
hey,
the Monkees.
We're the Monkees.
Yes. Hey, we're the Monkees. Right.
With more than one monkey.
We're 4 monkeys.
Yeah, but she had an affair with more than one of them.
Wasn't too clear on that.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, she was angling to have an affair with me. So she kept saying, "Oh, come on upstairs. You don't need to just park your car. I have a parking space. Come on upstairs."
Yeah.
I thought, this is kind of cool. Never had this experience.
Yeah. Flattered. Yeah.
I didn't go,
Yeah.
but I also sort of found, here's this titillating world. It's the big city with all sorts of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that was interesting to me too. I mean, I don't want to put maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but like
Jump away.
I felt like you could have taken, so I ask, did you rejecting the church at that time, did you reject spirituality? And your answer was yes. But I felt like another angle that it could have taken, which I guess I'm asking if this is real at all, is that those, in some way, I think people in a moment like that could see the big city, the adventure, the new experiences, the experimentation with whatever as being spiritual in and of itself.
Yes, although I would not have seen it that way because I would have dichotomized it.
Okay.
I would have seen it as the sinful alternative that I was no longer going to push against, right?
At the time.
At the time.
Yeah.
That's correct. And I would have not seen the way that God was using that.
Yeah.
Later. I did. But I would not have seen it at the time.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. So I was really into adventure. Very, very much into adventure during that period. And my mother said, the insurance money is gone, so to finish college, you're going to have to do it on your own. Yeah, good. And I went to a place called Roosevelt University, which was a downtown school in Chicago. We'd get up at 6 a.m, go and take Spanish, work all day in the west side of Chicago in the war and poverty, because social work and social justice became my substitute for ministry. And then go back and take classes at night and finish there, did really, really well, and drove a taxi cab in Chicago to kind of help support this effort.
So social justice became the substitute for ministry.
Yeah, it did. It did. And it became, in a sense, a much more meaningful substitute because on the west side of Chicago, I discovered things I'd never seen before in my life in the projects.
Yeah.
I remember one day knocking on a door as I was going through neighborhoods, and these people letting me in, which they did. The people were kind. They would let me into their lives. And they had two twins who were severely autistic, who had never been outside.
Whoa.
Now, most of the African-American population was from Mississippi or Louisiana, and the big city was a tough place for them, and they were afraid the kids were going to be taken away.
Different world.
Yeah, so I became very, very involved in the life of extremely poor people, and particularly with Spanish-speaking people, Puerto Ricans from a little bit further north. In fact, became the godfather of several Puerto Rican children, and they used to hang out the window and see me when I came, and I'd bought a little sports car, so I would come driving up in my sports car. So you get the feel, it's just a whole new world of stuff that to me was liberating, exciting, and entirely unpredictable.
Yeah. And that had to color this whole experience. Eventually, it sounded like you were saying later you would look back on these experiences and see that as sort of God leading you or Spirit leading you.
Yeah, well, I think there was liberation that I was experiencing, and liberation in a way that there were times when I could have gotten into difficult straits. And I remember once being in a situation that was risky, and I heard a voice which I identified in my own head as my father's voice saying, "Leave." Now, I can't prove to you that it was my father's voice, but I've had a number of spiritual experiences where there's a degree of certainty that comes internally. I can't prove it to you externally. And I left, and it turned out that there was a real difficult situation that occurred there.
Now that gets me. I mean, I don't want to sidetrack us, but that goes into a side of my thinking and conversations around spirituality that is what the most fascinating for me. I'm convinced, you know, as I hear people's stories, I've sort of become convinced over the years that for whatever reason, people there's like different categories for how God or spirit speaks to, for the lack of a better word, people.
Yeah.
And so you named like auditory.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I see that there are people in this world who like, it's always auditory for them.
Yes.
Or it's always gut for them.
Yes.
Or it's always coincidence for them.
Yes.
Or it's like, and there's like these different categories.
Yes.
Which fascinates me. So would you say, have most of your spiritual quote unquote experiences been sort of like auditory?
Auditory and relational.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me.
In the sense that, and that's how I view the way the Spirit and I work together, because the Spirit will reveal things to me at a certain point, and at points before the revelation, I have learned I need to be quiet and wait, and will be revealed. And it is revealed at a time. Now, I know this is jumping way ahead, but many things are revealed by the Spirit at a time when I'm able to integrate them.
You gotta be ready to hear them or receive them.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Can
And maybe
can you just back up and say what you said again?
Yeah, that the Spirit and I are in a relationship together, and that the Spirit speaks to me in terms of certain kind of revelations and suggestions and direction, but I sometimes have to wait for that. So I might have a challenge that I'm facing, and I'm eager to get an answer, to work it out. But the answer doesn't come for a while.
Yeah.
It comes when I believe the Spirit believes I'm ready to hear the answer.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Yeah, so...
there's a lot of meat there. That's good. Okay. Well, so, and you've named some of those, I feel like, already.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what next? So you're having these adventures.
Yeah.
These completely new experiences in Chicago
Right.
and in other places, and
Right.
and you are experiencing that as like sort of bucking your background in religion and spirituality.
I'm free now, you know.
But it sounds like, in retrospect, that is Spirit sort of guiding you.
Well, and protecting. That was the other piece of it.
And that
I'll
was
give
the
you
belief part, right? As an example of that.
Yeah.
You heard it as your father, but that's
an
an example of protecting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And another example would be, there were some dangerous situations I got involved in driving a cab.
Oh yeah, I bet.
I remember one night around Grant Park picking up, this guy was hailing a cab, and I picked him up, and he said, hang on a minute, and he went and dragged out a really bloody, he was a big guy, call him the bloody little guy, from the bushes, and he brings them over, and they give me this address way on the south side of Chicago. So I take them, and we get to the little guy's house, and the big guy gets out, and the little guy says, run for your life, he's going to kill you.
To you?
To me, the cab driver, yeah. Just run for your life. And all I could think of was, this is a $30 fare. I don't want to lose this fare. You know, but it's bravado, right?
Yeah.
Because the only smart thing would have been to leave.
Of course.
So I wait. And the dude comes back down.
The big guy.
The big guy.
Yeah.
He comes back down, and he gets into the cab, and he says, take me to the nearest underpass. Way on the south side of Chicago.
Whoa.
In an area nobody would look for me. And I thought, this is it, man. This is the end.
Yeah.
I was really stupid. Anyway, I took him to the nearest underpass. He paid the fare, got out, and ran away. He didn't tip me.
Interesting.
He did not tip me, which I thought was rude.
What a bastard. What? Okay.
All right, but I look back, my idea there was the protection element.
Yeah.
That there were times, no question, hands down, that I believe that God was protecting me from my own kind of sense of fascination with the unknown and the risky and all that.
Yeah. Wow, boy, and that just, what the hell was going on there? Like, you want to know that story, right? Like, what was going on between these two guys, and what, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I have no idea.
Yeah,
they
right.
didn't talk to each other in the back seat. All I know is I imagined that the big guy went back to the little guy's house because the underpass was not far, and I thought, wow, there's some ending I'll never know to that story.
Yeah, how weird. Like, why not just stay at the guy's house and then tell you to go? Take you to the underpass and leave you anyway.
Yeah.
Weird.
But still paid the fare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's sort of neither here nor there, but what occurs to me is, like, in moments like that, you said bravado, but it's like, I think also part of the angle there is, coming from a background like yours. I mean, I have felt like this many times when I look back at things I did when I was in Spain or Bolivia or whatever, that I grew up in such and I was a wild kid. I mean, I had lots of experiences, but West Knoxville is very safe and sheltered.
Yeah.
And so part of it, I think, is like I couldn't even imagine.
Well, I think that
would be that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be that dangerous.
And I don't think probably I could either.
Yeah.
In the full sense of the word, until I could retrospectively look back on this
and then
period.
Like, wow, I could have died. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I got some moments like that.
Yeah. Well, in fact, you've preached about one of them, at least with a friend in Bolivia, where, as I remember, a young child called a guy to come over in an area that was dangerous and protected him in some way. Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Yeah. Well, mine are not as entertaining as that story, but just stupid stuff of even, like, walking down. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about now, but walking in Madrid, home from a bar at 3 a.m. by myself for miles. Yeah.
It's
like, why would you do that?
Yes.
But,
right.
Yeah. So you Chicago, all that. Anything else there? And then
well, one other thing, and that is that here's where God's coming in again, in my view. I got straight A's at Roosevelt. I had not gotten straight A's at Wheaton, except in sociology and courses like that. And so when I graduated from Roosevelt, I applied to the University of Chicago to get a master's degree in social work. They only took the Roosevelt grades. And admitted me with a complete scholarship for 2 years. Totally paid for. So when I look back on that and I think, okay, and this is something that I've talked about with many people, things that we think of as disastrous or negative in their impact, in some ways may show aspects of God's redemption. And so I would have never probably even gotten into the University of Chicago with Wheaton grades.
Yeah.
And certainly not gotten a complete scholarship.
Yeah. That's for sure. Yeah. Well, and again, what a beautiful counter, I guess, to in your experience of that, which again sounds like it was much more, retrospective.
Yes.
But what a beautiful counter to the original image of Spirit God.
Yes.
That you were raised with.
Yes, so it's evolving.
Yeah.
The image is evolving.
Yeah.
In a way I don't know that I could fully put into words, but I knew it was evolving. And one of the ways I knew it is that every time I went into a bookstore, I would always go to the section on spirituality and religion and so forth, even when I was studying other things. And I went in to look for something in the area I was studying. That was always where I was drawn.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
All right. So there's Chicago.
Yeah.
And then go to the University of Chicago, and that's where I meet my wife, who is been been incredibly stabilizing in my life, and is really wise. She's smart, but she's also very, very wise.
Solid human being, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so she saw some of the stuff that was going on in my life, and she called it. I'll give you an example. The doctor
hate
had...
it when people call it.
Well, and they're right.
Yeah.
Particularly when they're right? But again, this is, I think, God coming into the picture through the presence of another person.
Yeah.
During the time in Chicago, a doctor for weight control, had given me dexedrine, which is an amphetamine, and I took that, and it really gave me energy to go 24 hours a day with everything that I was doing. And eventually I ran out of sources to get that, because the doctor said you have to stop. But I thought, well, I can't do what I'm doing without that, which was a falsehood. So this will seem strange to many people, but my mother was taking that, and so she got some for me. She kept the supply route going. Okay. You may want to edit this out, you may not.
No.
So we're driving back from New Jersey, where my mother lived. We'd visited her, and Peg was with me. And we get to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is very purposeful, because she's not going to tell me this until we get too far out to go back. And she said, I told your mother to stop doing that. And I gave her the pills back. And so this is the end of your pills.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she was right.
Yeah. How did you react to that?
I was kind of pissed, but I knew on some level that she was absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that I needed to challenge the belief that I had to have this substance in order to be able to be smart and productive. I didn't.
Yeah, but strong, I mean, man, forces like that in life are so strong. There's just dependency in any, it takes on many shapes and forms.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
Plus, it's all part of the exciting 60s.
Yeah, there's that piece of it, I would assume. But also, I don't know, I guess the angle I see is like, in some way, it's our consciousness continually trying to tell us that we're not worthy.
Right. We can't do it. Yeah, we're not worthy. Yeah, that's good. Because I think that's really true.
Yeah.
Really true.
Okay. Now that was, okay, so Chicago to there is what?
Well, we got married in 1970, so that was the end of the era of the 60s, and moving on into another phase of life.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's sort of like adventure, bucking, spirituality phase, right?
Yes.
Until you meet Peg and that sort of sounds like you're saying that sort of was like the cap, the end.
Yes, but in another way it wasn't, and I think she'd be okay with my sharing this, that she had been previously married, and her father was a Methodist minister who believed that when you're married you should never get divorced. So she was very unhappy with her husband, and she left him. And we hooked up and got together, and that was quite negative for her family and for my family as well. So I was still bucking the system.
Okay.
And we scraped together some money from my family for her to get a divorce in Mexico, which she went down to Juarez. Didn't understand anything that was going on in Spanish.
Yeah.
It was like a whole plane full of people that used to go down to Juarez to get their divorces.
How can you get divorced in another country and it be legal here?
I suspect that they have reciprocal arrangements where the U.S. observes Mexico rules.
Interesting.
But it was a thriving business at that time.
Yeah.
So
was it just financially made more sense to do it that way?
No, you couldn't do it then unless you went through all this process of proving guilt, and somebody has to have done something wrong.
Oh, you couldn't just do it the way we do it now, where it's just like,
That's correct.
I feel like getting divorced.
That's right. You can't just tear it up.
Okay.
Where in Mexico they could
Got it.
care less
Okay.
about all that.
All right. Well, yeah, and you all may have, I would suspect, may have matched on the bucking the.
And I think we did.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right about that.
Bucking religion, bucking spirituality.
Because she came out of this background where kids were not allowed to
Preacher's
dance.
kid.
And
yeah.
I mean, in Tennessee, East Tennessee,
Yeah.
growing up, no dance.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, you know about all that. So, yeah, she was bucking hers as well. So, however it worked, it's worked beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we were
And
kind of...
that just makes it even more hilarious. So I know the story in terms of like when you ended up feeling called to ministry.
Right.
But like that was not, she was like, what the hell? You know, but
Right.
that background stuff makes it even more funny now.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was funny when I first came home and told her that I had decided to follow this and I needed her support, and she said, "You're messing with me. You're joking. We're not going to do this." I didn't marry somebody who was going to be a minister.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she had had a lot of negative experiences, which have been reflected in the church. Mm-hmm. In people that I've worked with, and that is that there were folks, her mother made all their own clothes because they didn't have a lot of money, and people would judge her, how she looked. They would talk about the clothes not looking very good on her.
In the church?
In the church. Yeah, there is a certain amount of cruelty that can happen in the church, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's better now.
Pastor's kid, which is weird.
Yes.
You would think they would be protected.
No, under a microscope. That was her experience, under an intense microscope.
I get that. So, okay. Well, so we're Chicago, adventure, bucking system, peg, still bucking,
right?
Spirituality, and then where do you go?
Then I go.
You're married. Where are you academically at that point? You're doing your...
I have a master's degree, and I'm doing clinical work, and in a sense, that was still a substitute for ministry.
Uh-huh. And would you say it was spirituality for you?
Hugely. Okay. I mean, the first job I had was in a residential facility for severely emotionally disturbed kids, and I could only manage to work there a year. It was really hard. Yeah. But these were kids whose lives had been torpedoed. I mean, they had been literally wrecked, and they had no support systems. And so all of this starts to move you towards the notion of calling.
Okay. Before we get there, can you, and you may not be able to articulate this, which is fine. This is a hard question, but how in that example of working with these kids, what's spiritual about that? Why is that spiritual?
Well, to me, when someone has been harmed and is really vulnerable and damaged, and there's a way that we can connect with that person, the way I would describe it now is that it is the Spirit working through us, right? Yeah. And trying in some way to provide a lifeline to some of those kids. Mm-hmm.
So to put it in, I mean, this is like sort of very base level, cliche sort of terms. It's sort of like saying when we have opportunity to love into situations of such depravity and darkness, that we really encounter sort of God in those places.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I remember going back to the west side of Chicago, I would work with people in the projects, and they were very concerned about me, even though I was the one there theoretically helping them. So they would meet me where I parked at the time I parked, so that when I walked through the project, I was not in danger. There are all sorts of ways that the people that we work with communicate God to us as well as we to them. And that was one of the places where I learned that.
Yeah. I mean, echoes of that in my experiences in mission work and in Bolivia and whatnot. Yeah, certainly.
In fact, sometimes more, I think, sometimes we derive more than we're giving, right?
Absolutely. Which is a weird, I mean, this may be a rabbit trail we don't need to go down, but like, that begs the question of like, do we, in a spiritual journey, on a spiritual path, must one dive into the darkness?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of death and resurrection imagery.
Yes.
Right?
Well, I happen to believe that at some point,
yeah,
most of us will need to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I agree.
Because you can sidestep that,
I
but
don't like saying it.
no, it's painful as well as liberating, right? Yeah.
Sort of abyss imagery, letting go.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. So well, what else do you want to say? So going from there, do you want to round it out, or where do you want to go from there?
Well, going from there, I went to work in a child psychiatry department doing psychotherapy with kids and families, and loved it. Loved the connectivity of that, and worked with kids that other people hadn't seemed to be able to reach. I'll give you an example. There was a kid who called me one day, and this would be highly critiqued currently by mental health professionals.
Yeah.
So everybody who might be listening to this, I'm not suggesting you do this.
Right.
So this kid who really trusted me called me one day and said, I have a rifle loaded and I have it pointed at a schoolyard in Evanston, and I need you to come and get this rifle. And if you divulge where I am, I'll start shooting. If anybody else comes, I'll start shooting. Well, there are protocols for something like that, sure. But I went.
Yeah.
I went, got the rifle, and we kept it in our freezer for 2.5 years. Okay, so, I have thanked God many times for the ability to connect with people who are suffering in any one of a variety of ways. And I think from my own therapeutic work, what I've learned is that my early stuff that we've talked about has been redeemed and has given me an ability to connect in a way that people can trust me, usually. So this is what I meant by the theme of redemption and resurrection.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And that goes back into sort of like the darkness was necessary.
Yeah.
It was being used, right?
Yes.
In order to make you that person that can have such a gift, right?
Yes.
To relate to. It also brings up imagery for me of like, well, as you said, the hound of heaven, right? Of like God meeting you there. I mean, it's incarnational. It's God coming into the darkness, into the situation.
Absolutely.
Right, and walking with.
Or maybe even being there already before you're coming into it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, okay, so so from there, and there's, I know you're talking about like, we could hang out in any of these moments and talk forever about them. So
we could.
I don't know where your energy is or where you want to go next, but that's a life, right?
Right.
What happens there? I mean, is there another chapter you would go into there, or do you go from there really?
Yeah, well, I think that there was a natural evolution in that. Private practice of psychotherapy, getting a doctorate in social work at the University of Alabama, which was one weird shift from Chicago.
I bet.
Yeah.
Jesus left Chicago.
Yeah, stories about that. But what I would say is to fast forward a little bit to when Peg and I were teaching at Indiana University in Indianapolis. We both were on the faculty at the School of Social Work there. And I had a sabbatical coming, so I went over to a place called the Damien Center. You've probably heard me talk about this. It was named after Father Damien, who was a Roman Catholic missionary on the island of Molokai, where there was a leper colony. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so went over there to help with a statewide funding project because Indiana was sending all its HIV money back without developing any services. Oh. So they asked me to, which is not unusual at that point, so they asked me to come over and try and help with that through this community organization. And I did. And what happened there, I also led a support group for about 7 years of HIV positive people and their partners, and probably went to 100 funerals, because that was a period of time when HIV positive people, there were very few treatments, if any. Right. And I knew, in the way you know, that I was not going to be able to truthfully go back to the university ever.
Oh, from those experiences.
From those experiences. That there was, and here again, I think it was the presence of the Spirit sitting with those guys week after week after week, and talking about young death mostly. Yeah. That all those committee meetings at the university and all of that stuff was just not going to be fulfilling.
Yeah, how are you going to go back to the Ivory Tower when you've been
not my calling.
Real?
So I went on leave to work at the state health department to get their funding lined up, and it worked very, very well. But that was when I had my call to the priesthood. That was my initial call. The center was run by the Episcopal Church. It was the only church in the city that would touch it. None of the other churches would be involved at that point. And there was a priest there, since deceased, who gave me a prayer book, which I thought was one of the oddest gifts I'd ever received, with my name engraved on the front. I had no idea what this was.
Such an Episcopal move.
Yeah, and I'd never been in an Episcopal church before. My parents saw that as quasi-Catholicism and were...
Yeah, heathen, yeah.
Right. So he every week would say, well, this is the church I think it would be good for you to visit this week. And then on Monday or Tuesday, he'd say, did you go there? How did you like it? And I thought, well, this is really a good guy, so I'm going to kind of work along with this. And in that experience at the Damien Center, I discovered the Episcopal Church. And in discovering the Episcopal Church, I before too long discovered my vocational call back into ministry. So we've got a circle here that covers all those years that we've been talking about. It's the same call, but it's refined and reshaped.
Yeah.
Which was cool.
Yeah, really cool. I'm trying to tie all that together. I mean, a circle. No, it's beautiful, but it's profound. And a circle, this journey of, and I'm assuming, so don't let me put these words in here if they don't click, but like I assume part of that circle, part of that journey, and then finding the Episcopal Church was also a shift, a paradigm shift of, so you start with this like judging,
right,
spirit, God, whatever, spirituality, critical, and then you buck that,
right,
and you walk in the darkness and really find love there, find God there,
right,
and then sort of through that darkness, and then you find this other sort of flavor of religion that is quite different from the
incredibly
one
different
that you were brought up in.
Incredibly different.
And it sort of like in a way can sort of welcome you back into, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you've analyzed it well. I'll give you an example of how that sort of occurred in the concrete. Peg had also always been told the Episcopal Church was like the Catholic Church, so don't go. So for a long time, she wouldn't go with me. And then we decided we would attend this class.
Catholics, we don't think you're bad. We're just...
No, we don't think you're bad at all, actually. No. But in that generation, there was a divide, right? That's not there now to the same extent. So we go to this class, it's a year-long class, and they ask everybody in the class to talk about why they're enjoying coming to the Episcopal Church. And Peg says, I don't listen. I don't follow the liturgy. I don't pray the prayers. I just pray, and I'm just there. Mm-hmm. And I'm experiencing God in my own way. Now, she was sure that this was going to sabotage my movement into the Episcopal Church, because had she said that in the churches where she grew up, that would have been heartily condemned. Instead, everybody said, that is so cool that you can come and be yourself in this situation and just take it for what it is and make it yours. Yeah. And at that moment, she became an Episcopalian already. But I also, in seeing that, thought, this is where we belong. Yeah. It's safe. We don't have to fit into any particular mold in order to be included in this community.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That really is, I mean, I just am struck by, I don't know, just the flavor of the whole story, right? Like, what you just said there in some ways is the same, is very similar to a lot of stories you get from people who come from another denomination to the Episcopal Church. But having that entire journey background makes it so much more powerful.
Right.
And that's really, really awesome. Okay, so awesome, beautiful. I love this. And I know that, I mean, we could do probably a second episode of just like talking ministry and priesthood.
We could.
Maybe sort of as just kind of a last thing.
Yeah.
What, and unless you want to go down that right now, but like, can you name, unless it was one of the stories you already told?
Yeah.
Do you have like, this is the most quote unquote spiritual experience I've ever had in my life?
Yeah. There's one that stands out. And I think you've probably heard me preach about it or talk about it. For those of you that are Episcopalians, know that priests can have something called a credo experience, where you go away for a retreat. It's roughly a week long. And I was on that retreat in Florida at the diocesan camp in Middle Florida. And I was sitting during a break time at the far end of a lake at the middle of that camp. And there's a huge white cross at the other end that reflects in the water. And I was in a church at that time. This is some years later. I was in a church that where there were a lot of issues. And I was struggling with being there. My first experience in a church had been extraordinary in Aiken, South Carolina, but this experience was very, very challenging, very difficult. So I'm praying and I'm saying, God, what are you doing here? Mm-hmm. I learned along the way it's okay to pray like the prophets. You just can challenge and ask whatever questions you want to ask. You don't always have to say nice things to God. What are you doing here? This is not working. This is really not working. How am I going to move beyond this? And I hear a voice, and it says, you won't be able to move beyond this until you learn what you've needed to learn. So I then say to this voice is the Holy Spirit in my thinking, I say to this voice, well, can you be a little more specific? What is it I need to learn? Yeah. And the voice said, yeah, I'm glad to be more specific. You need to learn to tell the people in that congregation the truth, that they are mean with one another, they are fighting far too much, and you've been trying to skirt around that and find an indirect way to communicate that, and you need to tell them the truth. Okay, so I go back and I tell them the truth. 2 weeks later, the bishop came and said, would you go to another parish where there's a great need, and I think with your background you can really help. And it was a wonderful experience. Yeah. So 2 weeks later, if my response, really, I connect with what happened 2 weeks later. Yeah. There was another piece of that retreat that was pretty fascinating. I was talking in a spiritual direction, and I'll go over this with due speed.
No, you're good.
With a priest from Vermont about some of what my struggles were in ministry, which was built into this program. And he said, now I know something. I've never known it before. And I thought, what's he talking about? And he said, when Father Earl, who was the original priest that had introduced me to the church at the Damien Center, had died from a freak accident, they sent me a stole of his because we worked on the National AIDS Task Force.
All right, so we were rolling, we were doing good, and
Right.
we had a little technical issue there and had to pause, so we're back, and you were just getting into a final story.
Yeah, and it's a short story. I was in clinical pastoral education at that hospital I mentioned earlier, driving up to Connecticut from New Jersey, and I this kind of ties some things together, I think. And I prayed, as I often do driving, and I prayed to God that I said, I think I'm ready to deal with some real intense grief issues. And so I ask you to help me to do that and to walk with me through that. So I get to CPE. 5 minutes after we start, a call comes from the emergency room.
Ooh.
Guys died.
5 minutes after you start.
5 minutes, literally. A guy's died on the way to the emergency room, and his family is following, and they don't know it. And so send your social work or your ministry student down to deal with this, because she's going to arrive any minute. And I walk down and I say, you know, God, it's amazing to me how quickly you answer prayers. You don't have to do that so fast for me. A little more time would have been fine, but I think I am ready and you're ready, and it turned out to be a really liberating experience. The family and I connected well. We walked around the block for a number of hours, actually, until her priest got there. And it's just an example, again, of how I think it's not only the Spirit speaking to me, but it's also me initiating contact through the Spirit with God as well. So that was the point I wanted to kind of end.
Initiating contact.
I was praying.
Yeah.
And that was a response. Clearly, to me, that was a response to the prayer that I made driving up there.
Yeah.
Now, some people would say that's a coincidence. I have a way of knowing, which, again, I can't prove to you empirically, but a way of knowing internally when something is just kind of random and something is clearly related to our relationship.
Yeah, which is, it's just a sense, a gut. How do you...
Heard that and said, okay, we're ready to go.
But you, in terms of distinguishing between coincidence and that you...
Yeah, it's very clear to me that this is not a random act, that it's highly unlikely that within minutes of when I pray this prayer that's going to happen. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, so this has been a lot of fun. It's been beautiful. It's been a joy to have
I've enjoyed this.
I'm glad we finally got to do it.
And I hope your podcast is hugely successful, as I think it will be.
To me, it's successful. Just to me, it's the idea of getting to sit with people and have these conversations is an honor. So so in that sense, it'll be successful for me. So thank you. Is there anything that you would, if anyone ever listens to these, that you would want them to know about you? I mean, I know you provide spiritual direction. Is that something you want to put out there?
Like I do provide spiritual direction and love doing that, and have worked with a number of people as their spiritual director, and also have had a spiritual director for a number of years. I guess the thing I would like to say to folks is be willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
If you feel particularly drawn to a church situation or to something that is calling you spiritually, don't hold back, because the blessing of responding positively and letting God just deal with your fear if you have any, and giving you encouragement is very, very powerful in my experience, and I think that kind of has come through in my story. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I will, if you want me to, I'll put your email in the show notes so that if anyone does want to look you up for spiritual direction, they can. And we didn't even get in, man. Part of my story with you and Carla and our way of coming into relationship with you really was a real sort of spirit-led.
Yes, it was.
So we'll get into that another time. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well,
that was good, by the way.
I appreciate it very much. It was good. That was good. And much love to you and Peg. And appreciate you walking with me on this journey and other journeys. And maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, maybe so. All right. God bless.
Brother. Peace.
Bye.